Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind barabove.com.
So I am a former career bartender and currently do all the product development for our bar tools and our cocktails as well.
He's our resident mixologist.
Fancy.
It's true. And I'm in charge of running our shop. And what that means is I work with our factories to place orders, work with our shippers to make sure they get where they need to go, and work with our warehouse to make sure that customers get their orders.
Yeah, so together we run barabove.com as well as the Craft Cocktail Club Facebook group and also do this funny, awesome podcast as well.
A little bit odd, you know. This is episode number 168, and it is our very first episode of 2020.
That's right. It's a brand new year, brand new decade, and like many people, starting the new year means a New Year's resolution. So, Julia, do you have any New Year's resolutions this year?
Oh gosh, I'll have to think about that. I don't know. Maybe I'll keep them on the DL.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. But as many people do, we make New Year's resolutions. One of the most common one is to shed a couple of the pounds that we packed on during the holidays.
Yeah, if you were following along over the holidays, we had Punch Month, we had Infusion Month, we had hot cocktails, none of which were low calorie.
No, none of them.
So a lot of people take January as an opportunity to lose weight. And one of the really common ways to lose weight is to go low carb or reduce the amount of sugar in your diet.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, if you're listening to this podcast or if you're in part of our Facebook groups, you're probably not going to cut out cocktails because we all really enjoy them. But
we love them.
Yeah, so we're going to cut down a little bit of the sugar and help kind of curb some of the weight that way.
Fingers crossed. So if you're like me and you are lacking in the bartending skills, you might go for things that require no mixing altogether.
Yeah, some pre-made drinks. I don't even know if you want to call it pre-made drinks, but there are plenty of options that have lower carbs.
Here's how you make them. Open, pour. So 3 options here, the first of which is wine. Wine in general is reasonably low carb. I'm cheating a little bit because there's a huge spectrum of wines out there. But if you aim for something a little bit on the dry side, it's going to be lower in carbs than something that's considered a sweet wine.
Right. So on the white side, you're going to have like Sancerre, Sauvignon Blancs, Pinot Grigios, stuff that don't have a lot of additional sweetness to it. As Julia mentioned, there's a lot of leeway, so some companies can actually put sugar in. But true. Most reds are pretty much on the dry side. So reds are kind of on a safe spectrum, and even really dry sparkling wines could also be a...
Sparkling's dicey, though.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sparkling is a tough one because a lot of sparkling wines lean hard on the sweet side because, frankly, people like them sweet.
Right.
If you ever did a taste testing, we actually did this long before a Bar Above, where we did a taste testing of a bunch of different sparkling wines for our wedding because we wanted to cheap out on the sparkling wine. And the good news is we were able to because the cheapest one was everybody's favorite. And we realized after the fact, and by this I mean
the hangovers, the collective hangovers.
The hangovers dissipated. The reason everyone liked it the best is that it was the sweetest. And that also meant that everybody was getting hangovers. So pretty rough day after our wedding, but it was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. So be careful. I think there's actually terminology around how much sugar is added to sparkling wine. So definitely do your homework.
Aim for the dry side in general. If you just want an easy answer, aim for something a little bit on the dry side and avoid the bottom shelf in the grocery store. That tends to be where the really cheap and really sweet stuff is.
Yeah, so another one they can go down the road and start to enjoy is light beers. Now,
but why?
Light beers typically don't have a ton of flavor. You're not going to find a really robust IPA on the light side that I know of anyways.
Yeah, most beer is going to be problematic if you're going low carb. I mean, beer is...
liquid bread.
It's liquid carbs.
Right.
It really is. So yes, a light beer tends to be on par-ish with a drier wine. But again... I don't know, if I was going to go for low carbs, I might go for a robust dry Cabernet over a light beer. But again, drink what you like.
Right. You're definitely going to have more flavor on the red wine side than you will with the light beer side for sure.
But if you're going to drink beer, it's got to be a light beer. Because most beers are going to be really heavy on the carbs.
So the good news here is if you guys are loving cocktails, you already know, for the most part, spirits.
You know where we're going with this.
Right, exactly. So spirits
That's
neat,
enough
spirits
about
on
beer
the
and wine.
rocks. They're typically, all the carbs are distilled out of it. So
Right.
usually, well, some producers will add sugar back in for that rich, round mouthfeel. But for the most part, distilled products are low carb, no carb.
They are virtually zero carbs.
Right.
Yeah, most of those sugars do not survive the distillation process. Now, Chris mentioned a really good caveat. I know rums are kind of famous for having sweeteners added, so that's something if you're into rum and you really want something safe, maybe do a little bit of research.
Yeah, and tequilas fall in that spectrum too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So,
good to know. Would you say that this problem that sweeteners are usually more often added to aged spirits, brown amber spirits versus clear?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I just know that there are significant leeways that producers can make, can take to add both color, to your point,
yes, definitely,
and sugar
color.
for mouthfeel. So color and mouthfeel,
yeah,
definitely.
So take a little bit of caution. If you're truly trying to go zero carb, then just do a little bit of research. And definitely avoid flavored spirits. Yes, you might consider birthday cake flavored vodka to be a distilled spirit, but in reality, it's closer to a liqueur.
Yeah, it might actually have a lot more sugar, and I know a lot of flavor houses have like essences. So maybe like a lemon vodka might not be have a lot of sweetness.
Again, do your
it,
research.
Because I'm sure there are liberties that can be taken with that.
And it's not always something that's apparent on the label. A little bit of a soapbox item for me. I feel strongly about this, but a lot of liquor bottles don't have a lot of information on the label, so you might have to dig on the internet a little bit. I'm always that guy in the liquor aisle who's like Googling like crazy.
Yeah.
They love me there. It's great. But if you got something you really got your eye on, just Google it, and the information should be available somewhere.
Absolutely. So if you are a cocktail person, then there are significant limitations that we have if you're going to go no carb or low carb this month.
That's where it gets a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, most of the syrups that we have behind the bar are heavy sugar. Obviously, simple syrup.
A ton of mixers.
A ton of mixers. Anything juice related is probably going to have a ton of sugar in there as well. Fruit, yep, absolutely. Except lemon and lime are pretty dry. They don't have a ton of sugar on there, but for the most part, most all of them have significant amount of sugar to them.
So now we're going to take a deeper dive into the ingredients that you might use when making cocktails. And we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the sugary.
Yep, the sticky.
So first, let's talk a little bit about the ingredients to avoid. We briefly touched upon it a minute ago, but there's sort of 4 high-level categories. First and foremost, no surprise here, syrups.
Yeah, as we mentioned, heavy sugar. Anybody that's made syrups in your bar program, which is probably a substantial portion of people listening here or even at home, know how much sugar goes into making a syrup.
Simple syrup, rich simple syrup, honey syrup, agave syrup, molasses syrup. I'm missing one. There's one right there.
Demerara, Tornados.
Maple.
Yeah,
that was the one.
Maple.
Sugar.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can start going down the rabbit hole of glycemic index and all that jazz, but the fact of the matter is you're not going to change the fact they've all got carbs.
Yeah, and one of the things I found out during my little research on this podcast is agave syrup is actually touted as one of the healthy options.
Yeah, they talk about it being a slow carb.
Right, but in actuality, it's super high in fructose. So everybody kind of hates high fructose corn syrup. Agave nectar actually has more fructose than high fructose corn syrup. So do your own research. I mean, there's people on both sides of the fence. They love it. They hate it. It's great for you. It's terrible for you. And just like anything that we mentioned in this podcast, do your own research.
Yeah.
We definitely do a little bit, but if this is a health concern or something else even bigger, then do your own research, seek out professionals, and not just a silly podcast like this one.
Right. And for today, it's irrelevant because it's all just a whole bunch of carbs.
Right.
So
absolutely.
all those syrups are completely off the table, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
Now, a little bit later in this episode and throughout this month, we're going to be talking about alternative sugars, so stick around for that. But for now, syrups,
off the menu. So the next one is, we touched on this as well, but mixers. Mixers come in a lot of different forms. Behind the bar program. Juices are packed with sugar, especially like or if you can purchase them, they add more sugar to it. So there's a lot of sugar in those.
Yeah.
Obviously,
pineapple
Coke.
juice, orange juice.
Yeah.
Any fruit juice is going to have tons and tons of sugar in it. To your point, sodas, absolutely.
Yeah.
Coke,
All of them. Yeah, pretty much everything.
Ginger beer.
Ginger beer has a ton of sugar
Ginger
to
ale,
it.
obviously.
Yeah.
Same. Ginger beer will have a lot less sugar than ginger ale, but you're still just totally blown out of the water on carbs there. Tonic.
Yeah, this is something that really surprised me.
It made me sad.
Yeah.
I thought that tonic wasn't that bad for you. I think of tonic as sort of in the same category as sparkling water. So here I was having my vodka tonics thinking I was being good, and I was totally wrong.
Yeah,
so much sugar in tonic.
Yeah, we interviewed the guy from Q Tonics, I think it was, a couple of years ago, and one of the kind of defining moments of starting the company was him when he realized that all these sodas kind of have the same base of sweetness, and then they add all the flavor into it, including tonic. So basically, he mentioned a tonic being equivalent to drinking a Coke.
Which is crazy to me.
Mind-blowing to me, yeah.
Absolutely crazy. And so that's where the whole sort of craft soda movement came from. So nowadays, you'll have a pretty large variety of sugar level in your tonics.
Right.
But either way, it's not tonic without a whole bunch of sugar, because quinine on its own is...
pretty bitter.
Spicy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a pretty strong flavor. And sugar is traditionally a really good way to sort of knock the edges off of a really bitter flavor. So there you go. Tonic water, not going to work.
Right. So now this is the last little category in the mixers area, and this could be argued if it's a mixer or not, but liqueurs. Liqueurs tend to, by definition, have sugar added to them.
Yeah, I think the EU actually has a definition of what a liqueur is, and it's not a liqueur if it doesn't have a whole bunch of sugar or sweetener of some kind. So therefore, it's off the table. I mean, certainly if we're talking about some liqueurs everybody thinks of as being very sweet, Benedictine and things like that.
Right.
But if you're looking at Nonino or Amaro or things like that. You don't think of them as being very sweet, but it sneaks up on you.
Yeah, so a lot of the Amaros, you have this kind of a caramel note to it, and I'm sure a lot of it can be additives, but a lot of it can be actual caramel or heavy toasted sugars. So just keep in mind that most likely all the liqueurs you have a decent amount of sugar with it. One of the things that you can start to use, which is on a drier side, is like European style eau de vies. My understanding is that they're distillates from the actual fruit, kind of like basically a brandy, but they don't have the sugar, so it's kind of like distilled out. So that could be an avenue, something to look into and try out.
It's more a spirit than a liqueur.
Right, exactly, but it has a lot of flavor to it still.
Yeah. So now that we've taken away syrups, mixers, tonic obviously, and liqueurs,
we're screwed. That's
we're done here.
That's it. So yeah,
bye.
Spirit's neat.
Just kidding.
Make sure that your ice is zero carb ice too.
Zero carb ice. Yes, definitely don't want carbs in your ice. But hope is not lost. There are definitely some things that you can do.
So now let's talk about some of the ingredients that we have in bar programs or even at the house that are good for you, then can be kind of classified as low carb, zero carb.
I promise there's some.
There are. So we already kind of touched upon spirits, just raw spirits that are already distilled.
I think if distilled spirits had carbs, this would be a very short podcast episode.
Right, absolutely.
You wouldn't have much to play with.
Yeah, and I believe I would definitely double check this with some producers, but my understanding is that absinthe has very little carbs and possibly zero carbs. So that can open up a whole host of cocktails.
Lush absinthe with really ice cold water. I don't know if it gets better than that.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my favorites.
So spirits, we could do eau de vies, we could do double check with manufacturers, but for the most part, I think those are good to go.
Yeah, I think which is a good start, right? And the next thing that I think we'll all be relieved to hear is that lemon and lime juice is allowed.
Yeah.
Now, certainly lemon and lime juice without any syrups to balance them out can be a little bit on the
spicy.
Tart?
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit hefty on the flavor. And actually, that's something we did a little bit of experimentation with a little bit earlier this week, which you can find that in our Facebook group.
Exactly.
I'll see if I can dig up that link and put that in our Facebook, put the link to our Facebook Live in the show notes, because some of them were real fails.
Yeah, takeaway from that particular one is Ricky's. Is a kind of a cocktail family that doesn't use any sweeteners. It's just soda water, spirit, and citrus. So we did virgin mojito, not a virgin mojito, but a no sugar mojito. It was actually pretty good.
Not virgin, I don't know what that would be called, but
right,
it was actually pretty good. And actually, that's a perfect caveat to the next ingredient, which is okay, which is sparkling water.
Right.
Obviously, like, woo, not that exciting.
Yeah.
But the good news is that with the recent year or two's explosion of these flavored sparkling waters, suddenly you actually do have a lot of options. Now, we won't go down the road of which ones actually taste good and which ones don't. There's some strong feelings on both sides there. But the good news is none of them have any carbs.
Right.
So what you can do is, instead of just having like a super boring, but I'll say delicious, vodka soda, you could have a vodka raspberry soda,
right.
where the flavor comes from the sparkling water, which does not introduce any carbs. And so it's just a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, and I believe there's a bunch of companies out there making pre-mixed zero-carb cocktails that you can buy in little cans.
That's true.
White Claw, I've seen a couple.
Are they zero carb?
I don't know, but I know there's a bunch out there that are zero carbs.
So not cool.
I know. We're not in it.
But let us know in the comments, because I would actually like to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there are quite a few out there, so there's definitely some on the market that we can try and still get a decent little beverage out of it. But yeah, to your point, there's a ton of sparkling waters out there that are very delicious, could be fantastic mixers as well.
Right, so now you've got a spirit, you got a sparkling with perhaps some flavor of its own, and you've got some citrus. I mean, this is, like you said...
Ricky month!
I know, right? It's time to make a Ricky. But honestly, that's really not a bad choice. And I think that the one last thing that we can bring in is there are some other ways that you can introduce flavor. I mean, if all you've got is those three things, then there's not a lot of flavor to play with.
Right.
So how do you introduce flavor without introducing carbs?
So kind of at the heart of mixology and cocktail development, infusions is one of those primary techniques that can really open up a lot of creativity around cocktails. And this would absolutely apply to no carb month.
Absolutely. Infusions are a fantastic way to go. In fact, I would argue that bitters are just a really strong infusion.
Right.
And bitters is a great way to go. Again, you're not even adding very much, so even if they had carbs, you'd probably be okay. But they generally don't. Again, it's just a really strong infusion of flavor. And so that brings a lot of just, I think, interest on the palate.
Right, yeah.
Instead of it just being a really flat, boring drink, now you've got some layers of
Dimension,
flavor.
right.
You've got some different places on your palate being engaged with the cocktail. You've got a lot more interest going on there. But one thing to note, going back to infused spirits, especially if you were to take a look at our cinnamon infused bourbon video, it was very, very bitter until we added sugar. Yeah. And this is where you get back to liqueurs, right? So when you are, especially if you're going to start doing your own infusions to solve this problem, be really careful about bitterness. A lot of organic ingredients, when infused, do eventually end up going down the road of becoming quite bitter. Lemons as well. And usually the way you solve that problem is by throwing a whole bunch of sugar in it, which ends up being delicious. But obviously, if you're here, you know that doesn't solve our problem.
So yeah, that's bitter and sugar typically go hand in hand with balancing, just like making a tomato sauce that gets a little too intense. A little sugar kind of counteracts that. So just be careful, but have fun with it. I mean, there's a lot of roads you can go down with this, but bitters are a great choice.
Yes.
Spruce up some nice Rickies and kind of go from there. And then you mentioned, I think we mentioned absinthe in the beginning, but you know, if you're just using a small amount of a very intense flavored liqueur, there's not going to be a ton of carbs in that drink.
Right, I would agree.
So like an absinthe rinse or a green chartreuse rinse adds a lot of complexity to a drink, a la Sazerac, but very, very low on the sugar content.
And same with the spritz. You know, I mean, you could certainly spritz an orange rind across the top of your cocktail. You're going to get that beautiful orange oil without the orange juice, which comes with sugar. Yeah. Similarly, absinthe or other liqueurs, you can spritz those across the top of your drink. You're not going to get a ton of carbs, but you will get a ton of beautiful aroma, and it'll absolutely make the drink a lot more interesting. So if you like Rickies, you can probably stop listening here. But if you would like to do anything with any sort of sweetener or syrup, then this section of the podcast is going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah. So like I said, at the heart of mixology is all about creating your own ingredients, like really figuring out what you want and being able to make those things. So we took a lot of time and started delving into the wonderful world, colorful world of alternative sweeteners.
They are quite colorful, actually. Now, way back in 2014?
Yeah.
I don't know, a million years ago in the world of mixology, Chris actually did this analysis with some of the artificial sugars that were on the market then. It was,
I think it was Equal, Splenda, and Sweet and Low. So the yellow, the blue, and the pink sweeteners that you find on coffee stations.
Say no more, right? I know exactly what you're talking about. And honestly, it didn't go well.
No.
While some of them had the sweetness to counteract the citrus, I think we just did a simple sour. While some of them had the sweetness, it really did not take the edge off the citrus, and it really left you with a very empty, one-dimensional drink. So I think it was a fail across the board.
Well, and it was super thin. Like the syrup itself was very thin because you don't have as many dissolved solids like you do with simple syrup. So you just don't have the mouthfeel. That was the biggest takeaway from that experiment was it was just very, very sharp and focused on the citrus for sure.
But the good news is 6 years later, low carb has been pretty cool for a couple years, and the market has come out with a ton more options.
Yeah.
So we thought we would go ahead and revisit it. I don't think we even bothered with some of those, right?
No, we never revisited those just because they were so empty and so thin. They didn't have what we were looking for.
Plus, you ended up with 6 whole syrups to look at. So Chris did a whole bunch of research, dug around the internet to look for the sort of top 6 simple syrup recipes that he could find that obviously had no sugar in them. These are no carb simple syrups. So what are the 6 that you found?
So I actually found 2 different recipes for monk fruit sweetener. We have xylitol here, which is one of the newer ones. This one, if you're in keto, this one is a highly regarded sugar alternative.
I would argue it's the sketchiest looking of all of them. I mean,
they're all kind of sketchy looking. If you put them on a counter, it's a bunch of white powder all over your counter. Yeah, it doesn't look great.
Xylitol you can buy in either, there's kind of like a powdered version and a granulated version. Go ahead and get the powdered version if you are going to buy this one.
Absolutely.
It dissolves easier.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that we'll mention, we'll kind of round up this at the end, but each one of these had their own kind of benefits and drawbacks.
Yeah.
Stevia, which is kind of one of the OG natural artificial sweeteners, if you will. What's that one?
Erythritol?
Yeah, so erythritol, we made what is called a keto simple syrup, which is a combination of erythritol, stevia, and xanthan gum. So xanthan gum adds a little bit of that rich mouthfeel that you get from simple syrup, but doesn't really show up with a lot of these sweeteners.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. Now, if you use a 1-to-1 erythritol, it's going to crystallize like crazy. So it's not a good one to do a simple syrup with it. So that's where the stevia comes in.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. And last but not least, Chris asked me to find allulose, which I had literally never even heard of, and I was shocked to find.
I couldn't believe she found it, to be honest.
I was pretty excited. That being said, this little tiny bag, which is how many ounces? 12 ounces, was like $8.
Yeah, it's not cheap. This is the newest sweetener on the market, though. This is what they call a whole new class of sugars that I've never heard of called rare sugars.
That sounds like marketing to me.
I think it is. Yeah. I think it's like the champagne of sugars, basically.
Yeah, allulose is a rare sugar naturally found in figs, raisins, and kiwi.
There you go.
There you have it.
But my understanding on what classifies a rare sugar is that it occurs naturally in fruits, but it's so hard. There's so small amount that it hasn't been economical up to this point to get them. So that's.
And I would argue perhaps still not economical.
Right. So we did 2 different syrups on the monk fruit, and then 1 of each of these. So that was a total of 6. And what was our takeaways?
So the methodology, before we go there, is just to make a lemon drop. The lemon drop cocktail, I think, is as simple as you can get.
Yeah.
We used the same vodka for every single one. We used we did
batched out
a whole batch
lemon
of lemon juice, so all the lemon juice was consistent. And then we did a control with true normal simple syrup. And then each of the 6 simple syrups that Chris created, we tasted them against the control. We tasted them against each other. We actually did this live in our Facebook group. I'll include the link in the show notes here if you want to hear our toddler in the background screaming. So there's that. But we came with some pretty distinct, I would say, results.
There was one hands down winner, and it was like the minute you tried it, you were like, "Whoa, that was super good." That's about as close as you're going to get to a simple syrup, in my opinion.
I was very surprised.
And it was xylitol.
Yep.
Yeah, it was.
I was going to do the drum roll and everything.
Oh man, I totally just botched that up.
Roll. Xylitol was, I would say, hands down the winner for both of us. There was really no debate. There's definitely some debating about the middle. There was no debate about the bottom.
There was one that was clearly the worst.
Yeah, so xylitol's the best.
I think number 2 for us was different. Julia loved the stevia simple syrup. and I like the allulose simple syrup.
Okay. I will say stevia is a lot cheaper.
Stevia's a lot cheaper.
This was like $3. Maybe?
Oh wow, that's good.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was
and
super
of course,
expensive before.
If you buy it in larger quantities, it gets a whole lot cheaper.
Right.
So that was, let's say, tied for number 2.
2, 3. The keto simple syrup that we mentioned with the xanthan and the stevia was tied for the next round with one of the monk fruit recipes, the one that had more monk fruit dissolved in it than the other one. And then the last place one was kind of a thinner version of the monk fruit simple syrup.
Just very empty.
Empty, thin. It didn't bring the sweetness that a simple syrup does.
And it didn't balance the cocktail.
Right.
I mean, I think that was something we were really looking for with these simple syrups. We're looking for mouthfeel. We're looking for, obviously, sweetness, but we're also looking for the ability to balance out the citrus.
Right.
And I found, like, with all of the worse or the lower rated ones here, they just weren't up to the task. You still, it tasted like a weirdly sweet lemon. It didn't actually balance the cocktail.
Yeah, and that acidity really came through in different stages, like mid, front palate, towards the end, with each one of these. So it can be fun to experiment with these if you want to really target when that flavor develops on your tongue.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the point of what we were doing.
And again, I mean, I don't... So what are the downsides of xylitol? Maybe. Just
sure.
Because it was a clear winner, so we don't need to go into too much detail about these other guys.
Right. So xylitol for me... it was really great. The beautiful thing about it had the same weight as simple syrup. It coated the mouth. It was really kind of this rich, round taste. Didn't really have a lot of funky aftertaste to it. But there are 2 big drawbacks to the xylitol used as a sweetener. First, it never fully dissolved for me.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I made it, set it out overnight. And when I saw it in the morning, it was like crystallized at the bottom.
It was a little bit cloudy, wasn't it?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I would say I certainly didn't notice that in the final cocktail, but it's a good point.
Right. And now that kind of brings me on to another point. In the final cocktail, once we started drinking it and the level started to decrease a little bit in the glass, it actually created a film around the glass that looked a little bit powdery. So
I did not notice that.
Yeah, so after taking a look around, most of these actually did that. So that was one of the biggest drawbacks. It just kind of looks a little bit strange. Yeah. You're not used to seeing that in a glass. So that was a couple of my biggest drawbacks with xylitol.
I would say price is not a huge problem with this. I bought a really small amount because we were just doing testing, but I want to say this guy was maybe $4, and it was certainly available in much larger amounts, where the price per ounce gets a whole lot lower. So in terms of the spectrum of sweeteners, it's certainly not the cheapest. I think cheapest is going to be stevia, but it's definitely not the most expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the one thing I did want to mention before we get off this topic is xanthan gum.
Oh yeah,
there was a big downside to the xanthan gum. While it did add to the mouthfeel, there's a big downside, and that was, I don't know what to call it, like funk?
The foam.
Like it was almost like pond scum.
Yeah, so
that sounds terrible. It wasn't that bad, but it didn't look great.
Yeah,
there was sort of stuff floating on the top.
It reminded me like if you put just a little bit of egg white into a cocktail and shake it up and you don't shake it very well, it kind of captures all of the air bubbles and collects them into this weird gum on the top.
Yeah.
That's exactly what xanthan gum did.
It's not quite a foam. It's not really velvety. It's just kind of sitting there on the top.
It's pretty gross.
I don't think it was gross enough that you'd be like, oh, I'm not drinking that, but it's certainly noticeable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it never really dissipated. We sat there and looked at it, tasted it and all that stuff, and it took us an hour to get through the whole process. And even after an hour, it was very visibly
if anything, it got worse.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
It's funky. So definitely take that into account if you're going to be trying to incorporate xanthan gum. But again, with the xylitol, you didn't need it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the keto simple syrup, which we tried, which was the erythritol plus stevia plus xanthan gum, it was really milky looking as a syrup. It was kind of weird looking, and it never really did well. It was in the bottom places for our taste test, so I'd probably avoid that. I understand it might be good for baking. I don't know.
I don't think the erythritol did well anywhere.
No, it didn't. Yeah. It really didn't. Yeah. So for us, it was just kind of
This one is expensive too.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a lot of it left over from when we were trying the keto thing. So if anybody needs erythritol, maybe let me know. I've got a bag of it.
So the monk fruit did pretty good, but also left a residue in the glass as well. My understanding is it's not cheap. The monk fruit.
I don't remember what that one cost. It was kind of mid-range. And again, it was a pretty small container, so it would be best to compare the price ounce per ounce. And maybe we'll actually do that analysis. But again, it was kind of the bottom of the pack anyway.
Right.
It sounds good. Monk fruit sounds like a fruit.
Right. And the interesting thing is Lecanto is probably the biggest producer of monk fruit that I've seen.
Yeah.
They even have droplets, like Stevie has drops. They have drops now. But the main ingredient in this, looking at the back I just saw, is erythritol.
Yeah.
So I will say one last thing about these sugar alternatives is that there can have some side effects with your gastrointestinal stuff.
Thankfully, we only had small amounts, so there was no excitement.
This is pretty common, though, for this type of
If
ingredient.
anybody's heard about like the famous sugar-free gummy bears, look it up on Amazon. Sugar-free gummy bears,
the reviews
and read the reviews.
are comical.
Yeah.
Oh, they're so funny.
I'll put that one in the show notes.
Right. So just be careful. They can really aggravate some things down there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So to wrap it up, xylitol, it's great. It's a 1-to-1 sugar replacement. You may have to adjust some of your recipes. One of the members in our Facebook group actually uses xylitol as a sugar. She says, yeah, it's about 5% less sweet than simple syrup.
Oh, that's pretty close.
So, yeah, it's really close. So you may have to adjust a little bit. But
not bad, though.
The fact that it's a almost direct replacement for sugar, I'm thinking it might actually work for, like a ginger syrup, for like a penicillin, or a jumping off point for sugar-free mule.
That could be cool.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it could be a great starting point, and you don't have a big learning curve around.
You don't have a whole ton of math. That was my problem.
Yeah.
A bunch of these, especially when you were doing the old school stuff with the
700 times
blue
sweeter.
Packets.
Right. So
the math gets crazy.
It gets a little tricky.
So that just makes it nice and easy.
Yep, absolutely. So xylitol, give it a shot.
So if you're going low carb, no carb for January, hopefully this podcast is giving you a little bit more to play with in your cocktails. I think there's a couple key punchlines here. One, if you like a Ricky, we're done here.
Yeah.
A Ricky is spirit, sparkling water, and lemon or lime, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Easy peasy, pretty tart.
Yeah.
The sparkling water definitely mitigates the tartness, but there's no question it's a pretty tart cocktail.
Yeah.
If you like that, you're done. Perfect. If you prefer cocktails that typically have balance, like your sours and anything else, then you're gonna want to do a alternative sugar syrup. And the punchline there is very easy to say.
Xylitol.
Once again, xylitol. This was the clear winner for our test.
I feel like this podcast should be like sponsored by xylitol.
I know.
It isn't, but it totally should be.
We should ask them for money. But that was just, again, that was just our punchline. But more than all of this, I would say my punchline is come join us in the Facebook group.
Yeah.
That's where all of the, that's where the dirty work happens. That's where the behind the scenes videos are.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Maybe not. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe if you don't want to see that, I totally understand. The Facebook group is called the Craft Cocktail Club. It's more than 1,000 members. It's a lot of fun. We would love to see you there. But mostly, I would say happy mixing. Experiment.
Right.
Let us know what you're working with. I would love to hear what infusions you're doing, especially if you're able to get some really good infusions without that sugar component. I'd love to hear all about it. And especially if we've forgotten any mixers, any ingredients that you love that don't have carbs.
Absolutely.
Let us know in the comments. We do our research, but most of what we learn.
It's a big world out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we learn a lot from the community, so we would absolutely love to hear from you.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
So
below this video.
Boom!
You're welcome.
And now you know.
Ricky, xylitol, Facebook group. Right?
Infusions.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Wow! That was surprising. Okay.
We're screwed. That's
we're done
it.
here.
That's it. So yeah.
Bye.
Spirits neat.
Just kidding.
Make sure that your ice is 0 carb ice too.
0 carb ice.